It was Halloween night, and I remember the air smelled faintly of burnt pumpkins and rain. Children were laughing somewhere down the road, their little footsteps echoing on the pavement, and the sound of leaves brushing against my porch made the world feel softer, even comforting in a strange way. I was standing by the window, holding a mug of tea, watching the flicker of orange lights outside, when my husband came into the room. He had that look. Not angry, not upset, just distant. The kind of distance that tells you something's already decided. "Can you do me a favor?" he asked, his voice low. "Could you go stay with your sister tonight? Just for the evening. It's nothing serious. I just need to clear my head." At first, I thought it was one of his moods again. He'd been quiet all week, distracted, on his phone a lot, pacing the garden in the evenings, as if the night sky might answer something for him. I didn't argue. I nodded, pretending not to notice the way he avoided my eyes. "All right," I said, "if that's what you need." But deep down, a small part of me, the part that had always known when something wasn't right, began to stir. You see, after 30 years of marriage, silence between two people stops being comfortable. It becomes heavy, and that night, his silence felt like a door quietly closing between us. I went upstairs, packed an overnight bag, and tried to ignore the way my hands were shaking. He kissed my forehead as I left, a soft, distracted kiss, the kind you give someone when your heart's already somewhere else. The sky was dark, the wind sharp, and as I reversed out of the driveway, I saw the faint outline of someone standing by the gate, a shadow that moved too quickly to be a neighbor. I told myself not to think about it. I drove to my sister's, the car heater humming softly, and the radio playing one of those late-night shows where people call in to talk about lost love. Funny, isn't it, how the universe sometimes mirrors what you're not ready to say out loud? It was around midnight when my phone buzzed. A message, short, cold, from a number I didn't recognize. It read, "You should know he didn't spend the night alone." That's when I knew. The quiet, careful part of me, the one that always forgave, always waited, finally fell silent. And in that silence, something inside me broke. I met Daniel when I was 25. Back then, he was the kind of man everyone noticed when he walked into a room, not because he was loud or flashy, but because he carried himself with that quiet sort of confidence that draws you in without trying. He had a calm voice, a kind smile, and a way of making even the simplest things, like a cup of tea or a walk by the seaside, feel special. I was working at a small florist shop in town then, in Kent, near the old pier. He came in one rainy afternoon, soaked to the skin, asking for a bouquet. "Something simple," he said, "for a woman who deserves better than what I've given her." I remember laughing softly, teasing him. "So, guilt flowers, then?" And he smiled, that disarming smile. "No," he said, "hope flowers." That should have been my first clue. He knew how to say things that sounded right even when they weren't always true. We married 2 years later, in a little church with white roses everywhere. My mom cried through the whole ceremony, and my dad gave Daniel one of those long, measuring looks fathers give when they're not quite sure yet if the man standing in front of them will be enough. For years, I believed he was. We built a quiet life together, a home with cream walls, Sunday roast dinners, lazy mornings in bed, the hum of the kettle always in the background. We never had children. Not because we didn't try, but because life had other plans. It broke my heart, that quiet emptiness of a nursery that was never used, but Daniel was always gentle about it. "We have each other," he'd say. "That's enough." And for a while, I believed him. But love, I've learned, doesn't disappear overnight. It fades quietly, like the sound of waves after a storm, still there, but softer, smaller, as if trying not to be noticed. The first time I felt him slipping away was 5 years ago. He started staying late at work. He was a project manager for a small firm in Canterbury, the kind of job that comes with long hours and phone calls that always seem to happen just as you sit down for dinner. I'd ask him how his day went, and he'd shrug, saying, "Busy, that's all." Then he'd go quiet, scrolling through his phone, half listening when I spoke. I told myself it was just stress. That's what wives do, isn't it? We explain things away. We fill in the silence with excuses that make us feel better. But over time, the space between us grew wider. He stopped holding my hand when we went for walks. He'd flinch, ever so slightly, when I touched his arm. Little things, small things. But they matter, because love isn't just about grand gestures. It's about noticing when the quiet things start to disappear. Sometimes at night, I'd wake up and find his side of the bed empty. I'd hear him downstairs whispering on the phone, and when I asked who it was, he'd smile and say, "Just work." But I knew. Deep down, I knew. The truth is, women often know before they admit it. Our hearts catch on to the change long before our minds do. That autumn, the one before Halloween, was when everything began to unravel. We had planned to visit my sister in Bath, but Daniel canceled last minute, saying he had to stay for an urgent meeting. I went alone, trying not to feel disappointed. When I came home 3 days later, I found the house unusually tidy. The sheets freshly changed, the air faintly scented with a perfume I didn't wear. I stood there in the bedroom, holding one of his shirts, and something in my chest went cold. Not angry, just cold. Like standing outside in the rain without a coat, feeling the chill sink in until you stop shivering. I didn't confront him, not then. Maybe because part of me didn't want to hear the truth. Maybe because after 30 years together, the idea of not being us anymore terrified me more than any betrayal could. But when Halloween came and he asked me to leave the house, that was the moment the pieces started to fit together. That night, as I drove away, I realized how long I'd been pretending not to see what was right in front of me. My sister, bless her, noticed something was wrong the moment I arrived. "You look pale," she said, pouring me a cup of tea. "Is everything all right with Daniel?" I smiled, the kind of smile that hurts. He just needed some space. She frowned. "On Halloween night? That's odd, isn't it?" I shrugged. We all have our moods. But even as I said it, my phone buzzed again. Another message. This one simply read, "He's not who you think he is." I stood there for a long time that morning, staring at those 2 wine glasses. One of them still had a faint mark of red lipstick along the rim. Not mine. I hadn't worn lipstick in months. I don't know why, but I reached out and touched the edge of the glass, as though it might tell me something. It was still slightly warm, as if whoever had been holding it had only just left. My heart didn't race. It didn't even ache. It just sank, quietly, steadily, like a stone dropped into a deep, still pond. I walked through each room, my footsteps soft on the carpet, the air heavy with that strange mixture of familiarity and distance. Everything looked the same, yet somehow wrong. His coat still hung by the door, his slippers were by the fireplace, the radio was on low playing one of those old love songs he used to hum while cooking Sunday breakfast. But the silence between those little sounds was deafening. When Daniel came home later that afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold. He looked surprised to see me. His eyes darted to the sink, where I'd washed the glasses, then back to me. "You're home early," he said, his tone too casual. "I missed you," I replied softly. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, that's nice." I waited, giving him the chance to explain. He didn't. He just kissed the top of my head like a man trying to skip a conversation he knows he'll lose. "Work was busy. You know how it is." "I know. You had company last night?" He froze for half a second, just half, before saying, "No, love, just me and the telly." "Why?" I looked down at my tea. "No reason." That was how we lived for the next few weeks. Me pretending not to know and him pretending not to lie. We moved around each other like strangers sharing the same space out of habit rather than love. It's funny, you know? You can spend decades with someone, share everything, laughter, pain, quiet mornings, and still realize you never really knew them. Not completely. One evening while he was in the shower, I picked up his phone. I'd never done that before, never felt the need to, but something in me, some quiet voice, urged me to look. I told myself I was just checking the time, but my fingers unlocked the screen before my conscience could stop me. The first thing I saw was a message. It wasn't from a colleague. It was from someone saved simply as M. "Thank you for last night. I can still smell your cologne on me." My heart didn't break, not in that sharp, dramatic way they show in films. It cracked, quietly, like porcelain. I stared at those words for a long time, then put the phone down, turned off the bathroom light, and went upstairs to lie in the dark. When Daniel came out, humming to himself, he didn't notice my tears. He just said goodnight and turned away. The next morning, I packed a small bag and went for a drive. I didn't tell him where I was going. I just needed to breathe. I ended up in a small village by the coast, the kind with narrow streets and a post office that also sold milk, newspapers, and gossip. I found a cafe overlooking the water and sat there for hours, sipping lukewarm tea, trying to make sense of the life I thought I had. An older woman sitting nearby caught my eye and smiled kindly. "You look like you've got something heavy on your heart, love," she said. I smiled weakly. "You could say that." She nodded. "Whatever it is, it'll pass. Everything does in the end." Something about her words stayed with me. Everything passes, even pain. When I returned home that evening, Daniel was waiting for me. He looked anxious, though he tried to hide it. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice a bit sharp. "I needed air," I said simply. He exhaled. "You should have told me. I was worried." I laughed. Worried? The man who'd spent nights whispering to another woman was worried? But instead, I said nothing. Silence, I've learned, can say more than words ever will. But deep down, I already knew the truth. It wasn't until mid-November that I got the final piece of proof. I was sorting through the post one morning when I found a letter, handwritten, elegant, with no return address. The envelope smelled faintly of roses. Inside, in neat, looping handwriting, it read, "Daniel, I can't keep waiting in the dark. You said you'd tell her. You said this would be the last secret between us. I love you. Always, M." I sat there, holding that letter, my hands trembling. The kettle clicked behind me. The water boiled, and I didn't even move to pour it. When Daniel came home that evening, I placed the letter on the kitchen table. No words, no confrontation, just the truth, sitting there in black and white. He stared at it, then at me. His face drained of color. "I can explain," he said finally. "I don't want you to," I whispered. He reached for me, but I stepped back. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said. "She means nothing." "Her handwriting says otherwise," I interrupted softly. He fell silent. Then, after a long pause, he said, "It started years ago, before your mother died. I didn't mean for it to go on, but she understands me in ways you don't." Those words, "in ways you don't," cut deeper than any confession. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw a man I no longer recognized. The lines on his face, the tired eyes, the guilt that flickered but never quite became remorse. I realized I'd spent so much of my life trying to keep us together that I'd stopped noticing he wasn't trying at all. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply went upstairs, packed a bag, and left. The roads were quiet, the rain soft against the windscreen. I drove without a destination, only the faint glow of streetlights guiding me. I ended up back at that same little coastal cafe. The woman from before wasn't there, but her words were. Everything passes. I booked a small room at the inn nearby and stayed there for a few days. Walking along the beach in the mornings, watching the tide roll in and out, each day the ache in my chest felt a little lighter. Not gone, but quieter. On the third day, Daniel called. I let it ring. Then another call. Then a message. Please come home. We need to talk. But there was nothing left to say. The sea had a way of softening things, even pain. Each morning, I'd sit on that cold wooden bench overlooking the water, my hands curled around a paper cup of coffee, and just breathe. The horizon always looked endless. That comforted me somehow, because when something feels endless, you realize how small your troubles really are. The innkeeper, a kind woman named Elsie, never asked too many questions. She just smiled when she saw me come down for breakfast, asked how I'd slept, and told me about the weather, in that warm, familiar British way. "Bit of the chill today," she'd say, pouring my tea. "Good weather for mending hearts, though. Sea air does wonders." I'd smile, though I doubt it reached my eyes. Maybe so. It was peaceful there. So peaceful, it almost made me forget, until Daniel found me. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was walking along the promenade, the sky a soft gray, when I saw his car pull up. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it. But then he stepped out, coat buttoned, hair unkempt, eyes tired. "Mary," he said, breathless, as though he'd been driving for hours. I froze. "How did you find me?" "You use the same card for petrol," he said quietly. "I just followed the trail." He looked around, the sea, the quiet street, the small cafe I'd been sitting in for days. "You've been here all this time?" "Yes," I said softly. "I needed space." He nodded, stepping closer. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, then nodded once. We walked together along the beach, neither of us speaking for a while. The waves were gentle that day, just brushing the shore like soft whispers. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "It's over, with her. I ended it." I stopped walking. "You say that like it's supposed to fix something." He sighed. "I made a mistake, Mary. A stupid, selfish mistake. But I still love you. I never stopped." I looked out to the horizon, my eyes tracing the faint line where sea met sky. "Do you even know what love means anymore, Daniel? Because what you did, that wasn't love. That was loneliness and cowardice." He swallowed hard. "You're right." For the first time, he didn't defend himself. He didn't make excuses. He just looked defeated, human. I turned to him. "Who is she?" He hesitated. "You don't want to... Who is she?" I repeated, my voice calm but firm. He looked away. "Margaret." The name struck something in me. "Margaret? From your office?" He nodded. "It started as work talk, then coffee, then..." I closed my eyes. I'd met her once. She'd come to our anniversary dinner years ago, all polite smiles and compliments about the house. I remembered thinking she seemed kind. She's been there all along, right under my nose. Daniel's face crumpled. "It wasn't meant to hurt you." "But it did. And the thing is, Daniel, I think you knew it would." We stood there in silence for a while, the sound of the waves filling the gaps between our words. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said at last, "but I can't bear the thought of you hating me." I shook my head slowly. "I don't hate you. Hate takes energy. I'm just tired." When he drove away, I stood there long after the car disappeared, watching the gulls circle above the waves. For the first time in years, I felt utterly alone, but also strangely free. That night I wrote him a letter. Not to send, but to write. Because sometimes putting pain into words helps you let it go. Daniel. We built a life on quiet mornings and shared cups of tea. I thought that was enough. Maybe it was, once. But somewhere along the way, you drifted, and I didn't notice until you were gone. I won't spend the rest of my days wondering why. Some things don't have tidy endings. You hurt me, yes, but I won't let that hurt define me. If you truly loved me once, then let me go now, with kindness. Mary. I folded the letter, placed it in my diary, and never posted it. The next morning, I visited the churchyard at the edge of the village. Not for prayer, exactly, but for peace. The church was small, built of old stone, surrounded by wildflowers and ivy. I sat on a bench and watched the wind move through the grass. It reminded me of the graveyard back home, where my mother rested, and my father before her. I thought of all the people who'd come and gone in my life, all the promises made and broken, all the words left unsaid. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to dip, I received a message from Daniel's sister, Anna. She and I had always been close, closer in some ways than he and I. Her text was simple. He told me everything. "I'm so sorry, Mary." I replied, "Don't be. Some truths come too late, but they come all the same." That night, I dreamed of the first time I met Daniel. We were young, standing in the drizzle outside a train station in London. He'd offered me his umbrella, and I'd laughed because it had holes in it. I remembered how he looked at me, not with charm, but with warmth, the kind that made me believe I'd found home. And maybe I had, for a while. But homes can crumble, even beautiful ones. When I woke, there were tears on my pillow. Not of heartbreak this time, but of release. A few days later, I went back home. The house felt empty, colder somehow. Daniel wasn't there. He'd gone to stay with his brother for a bit, according to a note on the table. I wandered through each room slowly, touching the memories tucked into every corner. The kitchen table where we'd shared our first meal, the faded curtains I'd sewn myself, the photo of us at Whitby Pier, young, windswept, happy. I didn't take the photo down. I didn't smash it or hide it away. I left it right there, because that moment, that love, had been real, even if it didn't last forever. Later that afternoon, I sat in the garden pruning the rose bushes. It was something Daniel had always meant to do, but never got around to. The air was cool, the sky pale, the scent of earth grounding me. As I worked, I realized something. I didn't need to be angry. I didn't need closure from him. I'd already given it to myself. For so long, I'd built my identity around being his wife, his other half. But standing there, with soil under my nails and the wind in my hair, I finally felt whole again. Not as part of a pair, just as me. I brewed myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the evening settle over the street. Children's laughter echoed faintly in the distance. A dog barked, a kettle whistled next door. Life carried on, and so would I. It's strange how the seasons seem to move differently when your life slows down. That winter felt longer than most. Maybe because the silence had grown so deep inside me that even the ticking of the kitchen clock sounded louder. By January, I'd settled into a routine of sorts: tea in the morning, letters in the afternoon, an evening walk around the neighborhood before dark. My life had become smaller, tidier, but in that smallness, I found peace. Sometimes the postman would knock, cheerful as ever, handing over bills or catalogs. "All quiet on your end, Mrs. Collins?" he'd ask with a grin. "Quiet's not so bad," I'd reply. "Better than the alternative." He'd chuckle politely, not knowing how true that really was. One day, as I was sorting through a pile of mail, I noticed a small cream envelope with handwriting I hadn't seen in years. It was from Daniel's sister, Anna. The moment I saw her name, my heart gave a small, tired flutter. Inside was a single sheet of paper, neatly folded. "Dearest Mary, I'm writing because I thought you should know. Daniel's been unwell for a while. He didn't tell many people. Pride, mostly. He was diagnosed last autumn, shortly after you left. He asked about you often, though he said he didn't have the right to reach out. He's in hospice now, and if you'd like to see him, I think he'd want that too. With love, Anna." I stared at the letter for a long time, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. It had been almost a year since we'd spoken, maybe more. I told myself I was done, that forgiveness didn't require conversation, but suddenly the thought of never hearing his voice again, it hollowed me. That night, I sat by the fire, turning the letter over in my hands. I thought about all the years we'd shared, the good, the bad, and the quiet in between. I thought about how easily life slips away while we're still deciding what to say. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I took the train the next day carrying only a small overnight bag and a heavy heart. The hospice was in a quiet part of Kent, surrounded by fields that were just beginning to turn green again after winter. When I arrived, the nurse greeted me softly. "He's been sleeping most of the day, love, but he'll know you're here." The room was small, filled with the gentle hum of a radiator and the faint scent of antiseptic. Daniel lay in the bed, thinner than I remembered, his face pale but peaceful. A book rested on his bedside table, one I'd given him years ago. The Wind in the Willows. He'd always loved that story. I stood there for a while, just watching him breathe. Then I sat down beside him, taking his hand in mine. His skin was cool, his fingers trembling slightly. "Hello, Daniel," I whispered. "It's me." For a long moment, nothing. Then his eyelids fluttered open, and when he saw me, he gave the faintest smile. "Mary," he rasped, "you came." "I did," I said softly. "Anna told me." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted, "but I thought maybe it's time." We sat like that for a long time, his hand in mine, the air between us thick with unspoken memories. The nurse checked in occasionally, smiling softly at the sight of us. When he drifted back to sleep, I stayed a while longer, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. Spring came softly that year. The daffodils by my garden gate bloomed earlier than usual, and every morning I'd step outside with a cup of tea and watch the world come alive again. After a long, quiet winter, it felt like the earth itself was whispering, "It's time to begin again." I started tending the garden more, trimming the hedges, planting herbs, brushing the moss off the old stone path. There was something deeply comforting about it. Life, I realized, always finds a way to grow back, even after it's been cut down. Sometimes neighbors would stop by to chat. Mrs. Ellison from down the lane often brought me her homemade scones, still warm from the oven. We'd sit on the patio and talk about the simplest things: the weather, the birds, the way the sea looked brighter that week. They didn't ask much about Daniel, and I didn't mind that. Some stories don't need retelling. They live quietly inside you, shaping who you are without demanding to be spoken. One afternoon, I decided to visit his grave again. I took the bus into town, carrying a small bouquet of white daisies. It was a bright day, the kind where the sky looks washed clean. When I reached the cemetery, I found his resting place easily, the headstone simple, his name carved neatly across it. Someone had already left fresh flowers, likely Anna. I smiled softly and placed mine beside them. Then I sat down on the little bench nearby and closed my eyes. I've been doing all right. The house is quiet, but it's peaceful. You'd have liked the garden this spring. It's full of color again. A light breeze brushed against my cheek. I used to think forgiveness meant forgetting, but it doesn't. It just means making peace with the memory. It means looking at the past without letting it hurt anymore. For a while, I just sat there, letting the quiet settle. Then I stood, brushed off my coat, and looked at the view, the gentle roll of green fields stretching out beyond the stone wall. It was beautiful, in a simple English way. As I turned to leave, I smiled. "Goodbye, Daniel," I said softly. "Rest easy now." On the way home, I stopped by the seaside. The tide was out, and a few children were running across the sand, their laughter carried on the wind. I sat on a bench overlooking the shore and watched the waves move in slow, steady patterns. That's how life felt now. Steady. Not perfect, not without its lonely moments, but steady. In the evenings, I sometimes write in my journal. Not about loss or regret anymore, but about small joys. The smell of fresh rain, the taste of early strawberries, the sound of the kettle whistling while the radio hums quietly in the background. It's funny, when you're young, you think love is all grand gestures and forever promises. But when you grow older, you learn that love is really just a series of moments. A shared cup of tea, a walk in the rain, a smile across the dinner table. And sometimes it's letting go, gently, gracefully, when holding on would only hurt you both. If someone asked me now what I've learned, I'd tell them this: heartbreak doesn't have to harden you. You can survive betrayal and still stay kind. You can forgive without forgetting. You can lose everything and still find peace in the smallest things. I think of Daniel sometimes, not with anger, but with gratitude. He was part of my story, and I was part of his. And though it ended in sadness, it also taught me how to love myself again. As I write these words tonight, the sun is setting over the sea, painting the sky in soft pink and gold. I can hear the distant call of the gulls and the low hum of a passing boat. The world keeps turning, life keeps moving, and somehow, so do I. I finish my tea, close my notebook, and whisper quietly to myself. Some endings are really beginnings in disguise. Then I smile, because I know, at last, that I am home.